Please welcome Conference Co-Chair and Executive Director of the National Center for Energy Analytics, Mark Mills.
Well, thank you, David DeRozier, for your vision in pioneering the abundance framing before it became fashionable. Others now on both sides of the political aisle have now rediscovered that abundance is a basic social and political driver. It's the abundance imperative that is arguably more than the 2024 election shifted the Overton window David talked about. And thank you, Marty Durbin, for partnering with us on this, the second annual Energy Future Forum. Now at, as David said, the Carnegie Hall of Capitalism here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I think it should be renamed that. You could chisel in the pediment outside the building. And also, Marty, thank you for your succinct framing of the state of play in energy domains with just one word: more. You know, of course, the more electrons, more molecules, more pipes, more mines, and more infrastructure are all in service of more of the products and services that enable the pursuit of abundance. And Marty's also spot on in pointing to the fact that the International Energy Agency, an organization at the pinnacle of energy punditry, they have, until very recently, assiduously avoided and ignored the issue of data center energy demand. It's not a mystery to those of us who've been studying it for years. But they now join the legions surprised by the energy implications of a digital revolution. The consequence of the pursuit of more digital services and more AI is easy to summarize. As Marty said and David observed, it drives a demand for more energy. And you could say that we're witnessing, I guess I would call it a realization of a truth in aphorisms. Aphorisms are often based on truths. One of my favorite ones comes from the great science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. For those of you who don't remember, he wrote the book on which the Minority Report was based and many others. Philip K. Dick said this. It was a great line. We put it on our website for the National Center. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. It's a pretty good aphorism. It's also a truth about Washington, D.C. Congress frequently forgets reality, and they have the right to do that in democracy, to pass laws that violate the laws of physics, the laws of common sense, the laws of economics. But eventually reality rears its ugly head, and we re-equilibrate around what reality permits. In fact, 11 days ago, for those of you who watched this, it made its rounds on social media and X, and on LinkedIn. We witnessed what I would call a regression to reality in testimony before the U.S. Senate. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who's by now almost as famous a name as Dan Yergin and Elon Musk, Sam Altman was testifying before the Senate, and he said, let me quote exactly what he said. Eventually, the cost of intelligence, the cost of AI, will converge to the cost of energy. How much of it you can have, and the abundance of it will be limited by the abundance of energy. In terms of long-term strategic investments the U.S. can make, I can't think of anything more important than energy, end quote. You know, it couldn't have been better timed for a conference, for the zeitgeist of the times, and, as I would say, a Philip K. Dick regression to reality. Some of us are not that surprised that the pursuit of abundant AI shares a key characteristic with the pursuit of all forms of abundance. Let me borrow another aphorism, this one coined by a good friend of mine who is also an interlocutor you'll be hearing from today, Scott Tinker. Scott has said many times, and I think he's the source of this aphorism, abundant energy won't end poverty, but you can't end poverty without it. It's a great line. It happens to be true. Nor can you win what is now framed as a great power competition in AI without energy. How much energy it'll end up needing, how much will be consumed by all things digital, as Marty said, of course, is the question of the decade. The digital cognoscenti have long been aware of, and they've studied these energy appetites of digital things and infrastructures. But as with much else in the current excitement and hype around AI, it was really the pivot in history self-evidently was November 30, 2022. That was the day that ChatGPT was announced and burst onto the scenes. Relevant to our meeting, it was also the trigger that led to the fleet of studies since then that all attempt to guess how many data centers were built and how much power they'll all consume. Among the most recent of such studies, last month, again, as Marty noted, the IEA has noticed this. They released a study, as they are wont to do, as all energy institutes and think tanks do. We release studies. They released a 300-page tome titled Energy and AI. If you haven't read it, you should. There's some unsurprising things in it. There are some surprising things in it. And the report begins, like most of these studies, with a context on the energy demands of AI systems. The IEA repeats what was once not seen as conventional wisdom, but as they note, a single large AI data center can use as much electricity as 2 million households. And with myriads of data centers planned and announced, this means that lighting up the digital infrastructures will soon have the energy demands equivalent to reliably powering hundreds of millions of households. And this is a possibility, of course, that continues to surprise and worry a lot of people. To understand why so many seem surprised at AI's voracious energy appetites, we could blame this surprise on the emergence of a phrase, and you've probably heard this phrase if you followed all things digital, atoms to bits. The birth and rise of our modern digital society has engendered this seductive idea that economic growth can now happen, in effect, weightlessly. The atoms to bits phrase, for those of you who don't know this, was created 30 years ago by Nicholas Negroponte, founder of the MIT Media Lab, and his book was published 30 years ago this year called Being Digital. Negroponte was prescient. He predicted essentially all the kinds of things that have happened since the commercial and structural changes that the digital revolution has delivered. And Negroponte wrote back then, and let me quote him from that book, quote, "Bits are weightless and virtual and allow for instant global movement," end quote. It's that bits are weightless framing that has delivered an unintentional misdirection. The reality, of course, is that all bits exist in physical machines that have real weight and require real energy to build and operate. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the rush to build AI-infused data centers. To give you a sense of perspective, it takes more materials, physical materials, to build a single gigascale data center than to build a skyscraper. Just one such data center uses 200,000 tons of concrete, 100,000 tons of steel, and 10,000 miles of power cables. And I haven't mentioned NVIDIA chips or racks, just the infrastructure. So apropos Sam Altman's convergence observation that I quoted, once completed, such a data center, operating that one data center will consume as much natural gas every day as a SpaceX rocket launch. Every day, as much natural gas, and the Starship that SpaceX is building, for those of you who are not space cognoscenti, is powered by natural gas. It uses natural gas as LNG as a fuel. And of course, for the natural gas to be converted to electrons, you need to build megatons of machinery. Or if you prefer to convert photons into electrons, you face a nonlinear increase in the tonnage of materials required. The pace of construction of gigascale data centers does continue to surprise. And set aside the blizzard of announcements for what's coming, last year, the United States saw some 30 million square feet of new data center space completed. That's already roughly double the average construction rate of the previous 5 years. It's six-fold greater than the square footage added annually over the prior decade. So the trillion-dollar question now is how much gets built in the next half dozen years? Well, big tech, the Magnificent Seven that's labeled for people who like to invest in growth in the future. The big tech, the Magnificent Seven, have announced, as you know, an eye-watering $300 billion plus in infrastructure spending this year. BlackRock forecasts the annual spending could reach $1 trillion by 2030 in just 5 more years. I think it's fair to say that no one really knows whether it'll end up being that high, lower, or a little higher. But even if the spending flatlines in the $300 to $400 billion a year rate, the power implications are sobering. Put it this way, every $100 billion in new data centers will consume something like $100 billion of electricity over the decade of their operation. That right there is what I would call the ultimate convergence. Whether or not all the forecast hardware gets built and how much power it will all use, it's pretty easy to framing what will determine that. And it's just two variables, just two: the rate of growth in demand for bits and the pace of energy efficiency gains in the digital hardware. And both are, as you know, proceeding not only at the rhetorical exponential rate, they're actually proceeding at a real exponential rate. And for forecasters who are allergic to growth in energy demand, they're already claiming that all this hype about power demands from data centers is hype. They think that efficiency will conquer the monstrous power growth. Well, the forecasters who are allergic to demand and energy, they're half right. The efficiency gains are coming fast and furious, but they're wrong about the implications, of course. Rising efficiency is precisely what will propel the net growth in demand. We've seen this movie before. If it were not for the staggering gains in efficiency, the internet and all of its derivative businesses and benefits, they wouldn't exist today. A single smartphone, and I don't have to ask if anybody in the room has a smartphone. In our economy, everybody has a smartphone. Many of you have two of them. Your households have dozens of them. A single smartphone operating at the energy efficiency of a 1984 computer would use more electricity than a city block. A single data center operating at 1984 compute energy efficiency would require the electricity produced by the entire US grid. The exponential gains in energy efficiency are what made it possible for there to be billions of smartphones and thousands of data centers. And all that hardware today, collectively, already uses more electricity than the country of Japan. So when it comes to the prospect for vastly more efficient AI chips and data centers, history won't just rhyme, it in fact will repeat. And this time the efficiency gains are more significant, and it is true, they are coming faster. What that means is that the net increase in power demands will come sooner. As for the other variable, society's appetite for harvesting and consuming bits, that's the prime driver, of course, of all things digital. It is the prime fuel, if you like, of all things digital. And with the demand for bits, we have, in fact, entered a somewhat unique territory. It's the key feature, the demand for bits, that divides the worlds of bits and atoms. In the domain of atoms, buildings, food, cars, airplanes, highways, there are clear limits to how much society can consume and will build as wealth rises. It will increase, but the limits are clear. But in the domain of bits, of information, you can say with a reasonable degree of accuracy and not hyperbole, there is an infinite demand. There is no limit to the demand for information. There's no limit to how much information we'd like to have about, at increasingly deeper levels of granularity and at greater volumes, about everything in our infrastructures, in our supply chains, in our machines, in our physical bodies for our health and our health care, and about nature and about the very universe. And as the cost to harvest data keeps collapsing, and that is collapsing at a rate faster than the proverbial Moore's Law rate, society's consumption of data will expand apace. And virtually all that data, to come back to our central theme, the purpose of all that data, is in service of improving lives, whether for serious things, say healthcare, or making supply chains more efficient, making buildings more efficient, or the ostensibly frivolous things, the uses in entertainment and travel. The essence of the information revolution is the pursuit of productivity. Google just announced, and some of you may have seen this, its own assessment and roadmap for the energy implications of AI. Google's animating observation, let me quote what they said. It's a nice report. It's, to be diplomatic, unsurprising and uninsightful, but it's a nice report. What they said, quote, "The United States has a generational opportunity to build a new era of American innovation and growth," end quote. To which I guess I would say, I hope we would all say, amen. Innovation and growth, of course, are in service of abundance. If AI delivers on the productivity boom it promises, the consequences will be tectonic. Consider the one overarching metric that will matter, which is the economy itself. If AI were to boost annual U.S. productivity growth rate just back to the long-run average, not higher than it, but just to the long-run average, rather than the current anemic productivity growth rate that we're in and that the CBO continues to forecast. If that were to happen, that would generate over the coming decade something on the order of $10 trillion of extra capital in the U.S. economy. The GDP would be $10 trillion more cumulatively in the decade. That much more capital would go a long way to solving a lot of so-called intractable problems, not least the deficit. And set aside the energy needed to power the digital infrastructures, the far more consequential energy impacts from AI driving productivity is that it will spur economic growth. The core premise of an AI-infused infrastructure is that promise, and therefore the promise of what I put in the subtitle of my book, and still believe, is that we will yet ignite a roaring 2020s. But growth always boosts broad societal demands. Wealthier citizens buy bigger homes, they travel more, they spend more on all manner of products and services, and they'll consume more energy. And that reality is not baked into any of the forecasts that are the conventional wisdom. And so coming back to the theme of our conference, we'll need to ensure that that power is an enabling and not a constraining feature of the AI boom. As one NVIDIA executive said at another very recent energy conference, the tech community wants, again, I'll quote him, all options on the table because at the end of the day, we need power. We just need power, end quote. Amen. For those of us who have watched this and know some of the hyperscalers, that's what they're saying publicly, some, all of them privately. That's why this year's Energy Future Forum is constructed the way it is. Our purpose today, as both David pointed out and Marty, is to help illuminate some energy realities for precisely the reasons that David and Marty and I have highlighted. So we brought together leaders, experts, thinkers across the energy landscape deliberately. Not multiple people on each topic area, but a key, clear thinker and leader in each of the specific areas so that we can hear a diversity of opinions about diverse issues, not a diverse set of opinions about one issue. And we'll have this in a one-on-one conversations, as you know. This is what we're going to be doing here is not having panels with multiple people. There's no PowerPoints. This is a PowerPoint-free conference, which is something that I've always longed for. We did this last year, and it was appreciated. There was also, by the way, no Q&A opportunity for you. You don't get to talk. You'll have to listen to us. However, you can ask some questions this year. There's a QR code on your desks. If you scan the QR code, you can enter questions which will be asked by the Real Clear team of all of our guests in video interviews afterwards, so that those will be posted to the proverbial energy-infused internet for you to get your questions answered. And let me briefly mention, in the order that you'll meet them, my friends and colleagues who are the other three interlocutors. So we'll be rotating our roles as interlocutors with our guests. In the order that you'll meet them, first there's Scott Tinker, who flew in from the great state of Texas, which one has to observe that some people in Washington and some people in Texas do think is another country, with reason, I would say. Scott now runs an energy education empire, among other things. He hosts a PBS TV series called The Energy Switch, and he recently retired, not because he's old, because he's got other things to do. As a director of the School of Economic Geology and a professor of geoscience at the University of Texas. Then you'll meet Peter Bryant. Although he's originally from New Zealand, and if you haven't met Peter, trust me, you'll know he's from New Zealand when you hear him talk. He has that wonderful French accent that the New Zealanders have. He's flown all the way in from his home in Los Angeles, where he serves as the board chair of Clario, a global community consultancy with a particular focus on mines, critical minerals, and energy. And Peter, in fact, leads a fascinating and influential informal group of global coalition of mining companies and policymakers. The mining industry is indeed a global industry. And then our fourth interlocutor, friend and colleague, Sabrina Johal, who has also flown in from the West Coast from San Diego, where she resides, though her employer is the great Canadian engineering construction firm, Atkins Realis, building nuclear plants in Canada and around the world. Sabrina recently left a long career at General Atomics, where she was the senior director of their energy group, and earlier served active duty in the great United States Nuclear Navy. So, we can now turn to the main event. Enough about me, as they say. I think you get my view on the zeitgeist and why we've constructed the conference this way. I hope you enjoy our guests. They've been terrifically generous with their time. And the first one to join us on stage will be the estimable and well-known Daniel Yergin. Thank you.